Hi, welcome to this technical update for IBM Spectrum Protect version 8.1.4. My name is Trisha Jong, and I'll be working with my colleague Sean Sperry to walk you through the new features and functions in version 8.1.4 of IBM Spectrum Protect. This announces on December 12, 2017 and GAs on December 15, 2017. I'll be walking you through the new features and functions in the Server and Operations Center, as well as Space Management, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Sean Sperry to go through the Spectrum Protect for virtual environments, Spectrum Protect for ERP, Snapshot Unix, as well as database and snapshots for SQL. The first new feature in the Spectrum Protect Operations Center is an enhanced Operations Center reporting that allows you to build custom reports via a wizard where there's no SQL required. Back in version 7.1.4, we introduced the ability to create these reports, but you yourself had to enter the SQL queries. So we still have that feature where you can customize your own reports by utilizing SQL, but now we've introduced the ability to select from these different report sections: storage utilization, client backup, client summaries, chargeback, and data reduction, and you don't have to write the SQL queries yourself. So these reports, you can configure the report name as well as when it is sent out. Is that daily or is that a certain number of days per week? Who it gets sent to, and this can be a Spectrum Protect administrator with an email address associated with it, or it could be an individual who is not an administrator on Spectrum Protect, and all you would do then is enter their email address directly. You can then choose if you want to generate these reports for an individual Spectrum Protect server, all of the Spectrum Protect servers that are being reported on in that Operations Center, or a subset of those servers. You can choose one or more of these sections to have show up in the emailed report. And if you do choose storage utilization, then you'll have to make additional decisions on general utilization, primary and copy pool utilization, and container pool utilization. Likewise, with client summary, you'll be given the chance to decide if you want to see failed backups, data protection, and data reduction statistics. For the client summary, that will be reported over the last 24 hours, except for failed backups, which is actually based on the length of time your summary retention variable is set on the Spectrum Protect server. And you can set this with the set summary retention command, and you can see what it's set to with the query status command. Now, chargeback is a point-in-time snapshot that will be utilized for chargeback. I do have a YouTube video out there you can check out if you want to see how easy it is to set up, and if you want to see a little bit more on the reports. Here on slide 4, this is just a couple screenshots of what the sections would look like. Here you can see our chargeback that's reporting on 13 different servers, as well as our client backup, storage utilization, and data reduction. And obviously in the actual emailed versions, there's much more detail that you can scroll through. Overview report, the licensing reports, and the customized SQL reports are also still available inside of the Operations Center. On the Spectrum Protect server, we are changing the minimum password length, and this is to continue our quest for secure by design, secure by default, where you saw a lot of our SSL enhancements and other pieces that went into version 8.1.3 and 8.1.2. So with the default minimum password, the length has now been changed from 0 to 8, and this is only the default setting that's being changed. So if you do have min password length already set up, we will not change that. This will affect all kinds of server instances, including your new server instance and existing server instances that have never specified a min password length variable. Now, administrators can still override the default and specify a value from 1 to 64, but 0 is no longer a valid value. So remember, the default is now going to be 8. This does not impact existing passwords. Short passwords will remain valid until they expire or are changed by a user, and new passwords have to meet or exceed the new minimum length. So most of your passwords that are stored on the servers, though, will be candidate for this new minimum length. Your nodes, your admin, your server, your database backup passwords. The exceptions are your nodes and administrators that are defined with authority equals LDAP, and the LDAP password itself. When you upgrade to version 8.1.4, the server will replace the old default settings with the new default of 8. And you will see in the activity log this ANR 2138I message telling the administrator that this change has occurred. Now do be aware that if you have node replication set up, the target server has to meet the source server's minimum password length. That would be for the target server's server password. On slide 6, we have the ability now to take your Linux Big Endian Spectrum Protect servers and convert them over to Linux Little Endian servers. And so this will basically allow for the migration of a server from one of our operating systems to another, because we do no longer support the Linux Big Endian. So you will be able to migrate your Linux on Power Big Endian version 7.18 or higher over to Linux on Power Little Endian that'll be running version 8.1.4 or higher. And this will be done with the dsmserv insert DB, which occurs after you've run the dsmserv extract DB on the original Big Endian server. This is our normal extract DB, insert DB command that we've used for other migrations, but we have updated our white paper to reflect these Big Endian, Little Endian migrations. Okay, moving on to space management. First of all, on HSM for Windows, we've enhanced the way that we recall files. So in version 8.1.4, when we do a transparent recall of a migrated file, you're going to see a performance enhancement of 50% or better compared to previous versions of HSM for Windows. So what happens here is on your Windows file server, if you've used HSM for Windows to migrate files over from your production machine to the Spectrum Protect server, and those files are replaced with those little stub files, when an I/O request occurs against those stub files and the file needs to be brought back from the Spectrum Protect server and repopulated to its original location on your production machine, previously we would create a temporary file before we moved that file back into its original location. And in version 8.1.4, we've eliminated that temporary file step. So now when the file comes back from the Spectrum Protect server, it'll be copied directly into its original location. And this is where we get our 50% or better performance enhancement. You don't have to do anything specific to enable this other than to upgrade your HSM for Windows client to version 8.1.4. On slide 8, another new enhancement in HSM for Windows, if you have threshold migration set up for small file sizes, you may find that your candidate list becomes very large because prior to 8.1.4, even after those files had been migrated, we left them in the candidate list. And so if you were migrating a lot of very small files, the entries in the candidate list could actually take up more space than the original file. So if this is the case and you are using threshold migration on these small files, then you should set the dsmhsm-clc-bin file limit % somewhere between 1 and 99. And what that'll do is it will actually purge from the candidate list all of those migrated files so that once they've been migrated, they're no longer being listed in the candidate list. And so this will limit the size of your candidate list and free up a lot of space. Slide 9, HSM for Linux now does support Power Little Endian, and that would be on the SLES 12.1 to 12.3 operating system, as well as Red Hat 7.1 to 7.4. And this is for the IBM Spectrum Scale versions 4, 2, 3, 5, and for the IBM Spectrum Scale version 5.0 as soon as that GAs. And these are the three packages that will be utilized for that Power 8 little Indian. And as you can see, there's the HSM package, as well as our backup archive client and our API. There is a tech note that documents everything on this. You can check that out as well. One thing to note is if you are running HSM for Linux on System Z, the version 8.1.4 package did not update the HSM. So you would want to stay at 8.1.2 for Linux System Z HSM. On the space management for Unix, we've done some enhancements on how we repopulate stub files if you had some type of file system failure where you lost all of your files and stub files and needed to recover and rebuild those. This command, dsmmigundelete, is often utilized in conjunction with dsm restore-ders only to repopulate all of those stub files out on a file system that's being recovered. Previously, the dsmmigundelete, when it was repopulating each of those stub files, it would go out and query the Spectrum Protect server for each stub file. And this was kind of time consuming. So in 8.1.4, we have now created the ability for it to get the data that's needed to recreate a stub file, which is basically a hex number or UID of the stub file, as well as the full file name. And this list can be created ahead of time, perhaps on a scheduled weekly basis. And you can create it two ways. The first way is by issuing this dsmmigundelete.pl command against the Spectrum Protect server. Or another way would to run the apply policy command against the Spectrum Scales policy engines and extract the list of files from there. Once you have this file, you can then run dsmmigundelete-file list equals and point to that file. Now, even if the file lists stubs that are already there, those stubs will simply be skipped. You could also go in and edit those files and get rid of any that you don't want to recreate. And once those stubs are recreated, the Spectrum Protect server does receive updates for the new stubs DSM API handles. So here on slide 13, you can see us running the dsmmigundelete.pl against the Spectrum Protect server to create that list of files. Here on slide 14 is the second option where you could run that against the scale environment. So you would run the apply policy, and then you could awk out the list of files from there. On slide 15, we showed the steps for actually recreating the stub files using this new -file list option. The summary of this is by utilizing these new features, you can more rapidly recreate those stub files if you did lose your file system. Okay, and with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague Sean Sperry to take you through the rest of the enhancements.
Hello, this is Sean Sperry, and for my part of the presentation, I am going to talk about Spectrum Protect for VE and Spectrum Protect Snapshot. And I'm going to start out talking about Spectrum Data Protection for VMware and some of the enhancements we've had at version 8.1.4. As you can see, we continue to improve VMware restore parallelism and also use of the graphical user interfaces in both the configuration for the legacy GUI or using the legacy GUI and the vSphere web client. So let's take a look at those in detail. As you probably know, we've been going through in the last agile releases of Spectrum Protect for VE and adding continual performance improvements and parallelism for restores. And we've covered various cases for large virtual machines with single large VMDKs and also with multiple VMDKs. And now in this version, what we've done is we've added improvements to the restore where you're restoring multiple VMs. So now we can restore multiple virtual machines from a data protection for VMware installation in parallel when you do a restore, which of course can significantly improve performance over doing those machines one at a time. Now, The performance options and parameters for controlling this have to some extent stayed the same over these versions, but there are a couple new parameters that I want to describe to you. First, there's this VM max parallel, VM limit per host, VM limit per data store, VM max backup sessions that have been there for quite some time now. And in prior versions, we already had this VM max restore sessions, which controlled the number of sessions for a restore that could operate at one time. Beginning in version 8.1.4, we've introduced two new parameters, including this VM max restore parallel VMs and VM max restore parallel disks parameters. And what these parameters control is the number of simultaneous VM restores that can occur at once. Now, as you see here, the default is 2 for restore parallel VMs, and restore parallel disks, the default is 2. But you can increase those depending on the performance that's available in your environment and the infrastructure that is available in your environment. Now, of course, note that these will be limited by this VM max restore sessions, and the default for those is 8. So the number of sessions that you get when doing a restore will depend on that VM max restore sessions. And I will point out that there is also a lot actually of internal logic in the product that will control the maximum amount of sessions you get. So just because you bump these numbers up doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get all those simultaneous restores going. It's the product making informed decisions based on the performance that it's seen about the maximum number of sessions that will can actually run in your infrastructure. Now, some additional improvements for data protection for VMware. We have improved the initial configuration of data protection for VMware using the legacy GUI. There is an improved plugin registration data screen for this configuration that lets you look and see what version the plugin that's installed is what version the plugin installed in your environment is at, and lets you update it or make configuration changes to it. We've also had some new certificate acceptance logic, so we've added some SSL configuration changes in version 8.1.3 and later, and 7.1.8 and later. And now when you're going through the installation GUI, you can accept optionally the certificates from those versions of Spectrum Protect. And there were some instances where you had to enter passwords in the installation GUI which weren't necessarily used in the future. And now we automatically generate those passwords for you, so there's no need to enter them and make them up as you do the install. We've also added some new features to the vSphere web client, including the ability to view, add, delete, and test data movers in the environment, and the ability to view and test mount proxies for doing individual file restores, and you'll see some of those screens coming up. Now, I didn't pull every screen from the update here, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of information and give you just a taste of some of the new screens. This is the new plugin registration and update screen, and as you can see here, you can change the plugin registration information, discover information about the registered version, and the vCenter user account used to register the plugin. This is a screenshot of installation on the certificate registration. As you probably know, beginning in Spectrum Protect version 8.1.3 and later, and 7.1.8, we now do SSL and have the logic to automatically send the certificates from the Spectrum Protect server to the client in certain circumstances. And this just improves on that logic and gives you the ability to accept that certificate by hand when you are using those versions of the server and doing this Spectrum Protect for VE setup. This is the new Data Movers panel that has been added to the vSphere web client. And as you can see here, first you get some information on number of VMs, data transmission, and duration on the data movers. And you can also view, add, delete, and test data movers for the configuration in this screen directly from the vSphere web client. And then finally, this last screen gives you some information on the mount proxies that have been defined and allows you to test those mount proxies. So if you're having some individual file restore issues and you want to take a look and make sure that those mount proxies are working and see the relationships on them, you can do that. Okay, so moving on to data protection for Hyper-V for Spectrum Protect for virtual environments. We have a lot of ease of use improvements in 8.1.4 here. We have a new Hyper-V configuration wizard that was added to the product, and we have a new Hyper-V graphical user interface for operation and scheduling that is defined as an MMC. And also finally a PowerShell module for interfacing with data protection for Hyper-V that lets you do all of the commands using Windows PowerShell. So let's take a look at each one of those. Data protection for Hyper-V now delivers an easy-to-use customer experience for configuration, daily use, and reporting. As I mentioned, it is delivered as an MMC plugin. We do have PowerShell support. Data protection for Hyper-V does support both Windows 2012 and Windows 2016. And you can install in either a standalone environment or a cluster environment. So this is just a screenshot of some of the packages that are installed when you install data protection for Hyper-V. If you remember earlier versions, it used to be just the base client that was installed, and now you have these additional suite, license, web server, and JVM products that are installed for data protection for Hyper-V. We also have added a configuration wizard that allows you to configure the Hyper-V nodes on the Spectrum Protect server. And as you can see here in the picture, it is delivered in the form of an MMC wizard. And the thing it allows you to do is register the target nodes on the Spectrum Protect server, configure the various data movers that are necessary for backing up Hyper-V, including the client acceptor daemon, schedule, and agent services. It allows you to configure the file restore, including the creating of the data mover and mount proxy nodes on the Spectrum Protect server, and also creating all the proxy relationships on the Spectrum Protect server for the data movers and the mount proxies. Once you do the install, you'll have a MMC console from which you can manage your data protection for Hyper-V installation. And on the left-hand side, you have the cluster and hosts, or a single host, depending on whether your Hyper-V installation is a cluster or not. On the right-hand side, just typical of standard MMC, you have the actions that you can perform on the various objects that you select. And in the middle panel, you'll have the ability to select those objects, including virtual machines and schedule histories for data protection for Hyper-V. So basically, I mean, it's just a standard MMC console, which is very easy to use. You pick the virtual machine, and you pick the action on the right-hand side. The top of this GUI lists the virtual machines, and it is a list of virtual machines which reflect the VMs of the system in IBM Spectrum Protect storage. Down here at the bottom, you see an example of the backup history, so you can click on a particular virtual machine and take a look at the backup history. In this slide, you also see the PowerShell commandlets that allow you to do these operations in PowerShell. So if you want to script some of this stuff as opposed to using the GUI, you can use PowerShell to do that. We also have information on the schedule history and execution records that are implemented on the Spectrum Protect server, and also detail history of the schedule ran when the schedule is ran is selected from the top table. So you can get that information from the Spectrum Protect server. The bottom view of tasks is used to monitor the progress of a backup and restore operations, and it displays messages and related objects. And there you see some of the PowerShell commandlets that you can use to get that information. And then on the backup management action, you can show the available backup schedules from the IBM Spectrum Protect server and can associate specific nodes and a selected backup schedule by clicking the Set Schedule button. So basically what you're doing here is associating a particular virtual machine or set of virtual machines with a schedule on the Spectrum Protect server. You can also remove the association between the data mover nodes and the schedule by clicking the Remove Schedule button. There's also integration with the Spectrum Protect Operation Center at-risk logic for the reporting from the Spectrum Protect Operation Center and monitoring from the Spectrum Protect Operation Center. You can go ahead and set the at-risk information for a particular VM to default, ignore, or custom using the MMC plugin for data protection for Hyper-V. You're also able to do an ad hoc backup of a particular virtual machine. So here we are clicking on the virtual machine and doing an ad hoc backup, and there you see it's asking us the information about the ad hoc backup. And there is also a restore wizard associated with the MMC that lets you pick up virtual machine, see all of the available restore points, and go ahead and perform a restore of a virtual machine using that wizard. In addition to that, there's finally a file restore action, which lets you restore files to a particular virtual machine, and it lets you authenticate to the virtual machine with the virtual machine name, host address, and operating system type. And there you see a picture of the screenshot that will be displayed when you go to do an individual file restore. Now finally, as I mentioned, there is a module, a PowerShell module that is delivered with data protection for Hyper-V. It is called DP-HV module, and it includes the commandlets used to interact with DP for Hyper-V via the DP for Hyper-V REST API. Now, when you're interacting with this using scriptlets, using commandlets, you're just going to use the DP-HV module commands, but in the background there is a REST API layer that is exposed via these commandments. So that's what this screen is talking about. And as mentioned in the bottom bullet, the documentation does provide more examples and more details on how to use all of these commandlets. If I were going to do some of the scripting of this and wasn't going to use the MMC, I just load up the module and look at the help examples that were provided there. So now I'd like to move on into a couple changes in Spectrum Protect for ERP, data protection for SAP. And they include some improvement in the performance for parallel redo logs, and a new max versions parameter now supported in SAP HANA. So beginning in version 8.1.4, our developers have improved redo log copy performance enhancement to speed up the writing by using parallel threads to both Spectrum Protect servers. As you can see here in this picture, when you're using data protection for SAP, you can have multiple copies of the redo logs sent to different Spectrum Protect servers for redundancy sake. And in version 8.1.4, the improvement for the performance has been improved for that for data protection for SAP and Oracle RMAN, SAP DB2, and data protection for SAP HANA. This basically comes from a request for enhancement, and it was already being done in data protection for SAP Oracle using backend. As mentioned in the slide, this feature is turned on by default and can't be turned off, so there is no profile parameter for it. The next enhancement for data protection for SAP HANA is the new profile parameter max versions, which is now supported in HANA environments. You will now be allowed to set that parameter when you set up the product using that setup.sh. But for existing configurations, your existing parameters will not be changed. Moving on to Spectrum Protect Snapshot for Unix, there are a few enhancements for Oracle, actually some fairly big enhancements for Oracle that I'd like to point out to you, including a single administrative user for backing up multiple Oracle instances, some new graphical configuration and migration wizards, support for Oracle 12c R2, and also some enhancements in the dynamic target adapter for SVC or Spectrum virtualized incremental snapshots. So let's take a look at those one by one. First off, in the past, if you wanted to implement Spectrum Protect Snapshot for Oracle, and your databases, and you had multiple databases managed by a single user ID, you had to have multiple installations of Spectrum Protect Snapshot. And beginning in version 8.1.4, that restriction has been lifted. So now for Oracle databases managed by a single user ID or a single owner, you only need a single Spectrum Protect Snapshot instance represented by a single set of binaries, the single set of daemons, and single repository. The reason this is important is because you used to have to do activation more than once and configuration more than once, and now you can do activation and configuration once for all of the Oracle databases protected by Spectrum Protect Snapshot on a system. So you do the monitoring by a single user, and you can also control the operations on a different database independently of each other. Now, if you do come from an older environment where you have multiple installations of Spectrum Protect Snapshot controlling these multiple databases. We have delivered a migration wizard, a graphical migration wizard for you to use against those installations. And the migration wizard can be used to migrate existing SPS for Oracle instances into a single SPS for Oracle instance managing multiple Oracle databases. And this migration wizard pretty much works exactly as you would expect it to. The repository content is moved into the repository of the multi-database instance. The profile sections are added to a single profile of the multi-database instance. The daemons that are running for Spectrum Protect Snapshot are stopped in case for the multiple instances are stopped. And all of the historical information will be available in the new instance. That new wizard is started using this instance migration under aura.sh script. Now, in addition to that migration wizard, one of the new things that we've delivered is a graphical configuration wizard for Spectrum Protect Snapshot for Oracle. The configuration for Spectrum Protect Snapshot for Oracle used to be done via script, and it was a little extra work to go through the script multiple times and to change parameters. So now it's a lot easier to go through the configuration and to change the configuration, since you're in a graphical wizard and you can easily jump back and forth to the various sections of the configuration. Okay, moving on to Spectrum Protect Snapshot for Unix and the Dynamic Target Adapter, or the DTA, Dynamic Target Allocation Adapter. We now support flash copy type incremental beginning at 8.1.4. Now, the way this works is, depending on the max versions parameter in your configuration, the DTA will create full copies of the data for that number or that max versions number, and then start reusing the targets from the initial backup when it reaches that max version setting. So you see here we're using an SVC, we're creating snapshots. The max version parameter is set to 3. As we're creating the first 3 snapshots, we get full copies. When we hit the 4th, we go back and do an incremental refresh on the first. So that is how the incremental refresh is used and is created when you're using the Dynamic Target Adapter, or DTA. Now, I won't read this slide completely to you. I'll let you do some reading on your own if you're interested in this particular feature. But there has been a change in the way that versioning is set in Spectrum Protect Snapshot for Unix. Because with this new incremental backups, we may end up creating more snapshots than in previous versions of the product. And that's because the versioning now has to be set on a per device class basis. So the recommendation here is, take a look at the versions that you're creating, and if you are migrating to version 8.1.4, take a look at how the new versioning works and potentially reduce the number of versions to create the number of snapshots that you need. And finally, a some improvements for Spectrum Protect for databases and Snapshot for SQL Server. First, we have SQL Server 2017 support, so we begin supporting SQL Server 2017. We're also allowing now, in terms of some additional functionality as opposed to just an uplift, SQL Server VSS restores to an alternate server or to an alternate instance on the same server. And we're also beginning the support of SQL Server database cloning with Spectrum Protect Snapshot. So just a couple details on these settings. As I mentioned, we're now supporting SQL 2017 with Spectrum Protect Snapshot and Spectrum Protect for databases. As always, it's just a good idea to Google all requirements document and look for the latest support details before you're implementing this or before you're upgrading your version of SQL. It will give you the latest and greatest details along with any other information about what's supported and what's not in terms of SQL Server. Beginning in version 8.1.4, we now support VSS restores to an alternate system or to an alternate system instance on the same name of a database that is backed up with VSS. And then finally, we now support with Spectrum Protect Snapshot SQL database cloning. Now this is something that's always been supported with Spectrum Protect Snapshot for Unix, for DB2 and Oracle and SAP, but it was a limitation on Spectrum Protect Snapshot for Windows. And in this version 8.1.4, we're beginning the support for that. Now there are a couple pieces of information that I want to share with you at this point. First, you do need a VSS hardware provider in order to support this, so it's not going to be supported with a software VSS provider. And at the version 8.1.4 implementation, it is PowerShell commandlets only to do this cloning. So that ends the 8.1.4 update. I hope you found that information useful, and I look forward to seeing you on another video.